Orange is so nice.
It's actually, I was gonna ask, is there a survey?
Yeah, what's the date right before Thanksgiving? We'll have to stop it.
Also kind of updated my title, so.
I don't know if we said this specific date. I think we did say like.
Because,
Yeah,
the,
so they know, yeah.
I was asked to send the abstract in the title, like,
Yeah.
you went to.
Yeah.
Things have been changed, but it's still fits. It's
General
still
topic.
more- Yeah, it's more.
Or one thing.
Yeah.
It's 15. So they know that thing.
Yeah, so we gotta get people to do it now.
So how
No,
you're
procrastination.
usually the windows.
Yeah, that's done buildings go, you're quite lucky.
Yeah.
So it's like.
Oh my gosh.
Are we on? These people a couple more minutes.
Spreading it all.
I was thinking we should just have lunch again.
So I do it, it's. And then I just.
Yeah, no. And I'm new. I wanna search and see if there's something. Like this, things that it's each other. There's kind of stuff to do, yeah, the old stuff.
Yeah. It does.
Pieces of
Yeah. It's also like if you're very, it's like, oh yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's really find out.
I know that. And they say that they were so original, yeah, you thought.
I felt like exactly.
Yeah, we're like,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah. I mean, I've always tried to.
We could get real. So long as you. I like some of the best panels on our side. So I mean, do you have any time next week?
Time, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what are the dates? Like, when are you?
In person?
Yeah.
But I'm right. I was sitting with you.
It's not, so it's like the end.
Days, so like Thursdays, yeah. I think that was all. Sure.
I might not. I'll send you emails.
So, yeah.
No, you're about to, I'll send you now.
Either way.
All right, it is 1:01, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're all here. My name is Melissa Barnett. I am the director of the Francis McClellan Institute for Children, Youth, and Families. And before I turn it over to our speaker, I just want to tell you a little bit about our work, starting with, of course, acknowledging where we are here in Tucson, Arizona. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. The university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. And that is the official land acknowledgement of the University of Arizona that was developed in partnership with tribes across the state. So at the Francis McCollum Institute, our goal is to work collaboratively to use the power of research to build family resilience so that children, youth, and families have the opportunity to thrive. And we do this by supporting innovative research, by actively partnering with community organizations, by sharing research findings with researchers, practitioners, and the community, and educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders. An important aspect of our work is the Science of Kindness Community Collective. All right, and directly connected to today's content. And the goal of SciKind is to contribute to the creation of a community of practice to increase kind behavior for the benefit of all. We're glad to have so many kind cats here in the room today. All of the work we do is to honor the legacy of Francis McClellan, who really and truly lived a life that exemplified and facilitated resilience. She, despite having a disability, despite coming from an immigrant background at the time, was discriminated against. Despite being a woman, she succeeded in business. She was incredibly generous with her time and her knowledge and her money as well. And she also really believed in the power of research to solve societal problems. So we are grateful to her. We are also grateful to Pam Turbeville, another distinguished alum who makes this speaker series possible. And I will say this is the last speaker in the series this semester. We hope you join us next semester when we have 3 talks in the lineup. But we are so happy to have Dr. Milla Titova join us today. Dr. Titova earned her PhD in psychology from the University of Missouri. Prior to joining the University of Arizona, she was faculty at Elon University and the University of Washington. She is currently an assistant professor of psychology here at the U of A, where she directs the Happiness and Well-Being Lab. Her work explores how people find happiness and meaning in everyday life, with a special focus on the role of places, social connections, and culture in shaping well-being. Her research explores how people's perceptions of places are shaped by emotions and social connections, and how feeling attached to places contributes to a sense of meaning and belonging. She also examines kindness, prosocial behavior, and cultural influences on emotional experience. Across these projects, she aims to understand how everyday contexts, from our living spaces to our social interactions, help people flourish and feel connected. It is so wonderful to have you here today. I think we all will feel good about focusing on this particular topic. So thank you for joining us today. And I will turn it over to you. If you have questions and you're in the room, feel free to raise your hand. We're going to mainly save time for Q&A at the end of her talk. If you are online, you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I will be monitoring that throughout the talk.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And just a heads up, I did narrow down my title a little bit from the one that you guys might have saw. Just because kind of like I wasn't sure what exact studies I'm going to be talking about within this talk today when I was asked to kind of give a little descriptor of my potential talk. And then since then, I kind of narrowed it down. So the title of today's talk is Rooted Yet Reaching: How Places Help Us Find Meaning in Life. And I want to start by inviting you guys to think about a place that feels most like home to you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your kind of street address. It could be a city skyline. It could be a nature trail. It could be somebody else's home. It could be so many different places. So just take a moment, kind of, mentally travel to that place and think about it, kind of put yourself mentally in that space. So the place that you might have thought about is what people or researchers in environmental psychology more specifically would refer to as place attachment. And specifically, place attachment is defined as the emotional bond between a person and a specific physical place. And what is interesting about place attachment to me as a well-being researcher is that it has a lot of not only psychological kind of characteristic, but also characteristics that are specifically important to our well-being and happiness. So this place attachment, or this kind of connection or bond, captures the affective, cognitive, and behavioral connections that we make with certain places that are personally meaningful to us, places, I mean. And it provides a sense of stability, especially during the times of transition, or when we're thinking about transition, both kind of the physical transition where we might be moving somewhere, or more of the psychological transitions that we might be experiencing in our life. It also allows us to have continuity in terms of our identity, which is also important for supporting our well-being, and supports sense of belonging and well-being overall. Also, people who experiencing greater sense of attachment to place report having greater life satisfaction, greater sense of psychological security, and most importantly, psychological health, which of course includes well-being as well. So given all of that, again, as a well-being researcher, I was really curious to look more into kind of places of attachment, and specifically how that can connect to those positive psychological outcomes. However, most of the existing research on place attachment really concentrates on kind of like how we form those attachments, what kind of places we form those attachments with, and how this attachment develops. However, there's a lot less work that looks at kind of why those places of attachment, or having this feeling of attachment to place actually matters to us psychologically. So we know it's kind of good for us, but like, why exactly is it good for us? And kind of one of the interesting things that I was interested in examining within my work is the relationship of place attachment and the sense of meaning that we might experience in our life. So more specifically, I was interested in a question of, do places of attachment actually help us find meaning? And when I'm talking about meaning here, I don't mean like, what is the meaning of life? It's more like the sense that our life has purpose, that there is sense in the things that we do, not necessarily this like kind of existential questions of, kind of like, what is it, but more of a sense that like, I am making sense in this world, like life is making sense for me. So just to kind of clarify that. And first I want to mention kind of the series of studies that were foundational to the studies that I'm going to be talking about in more detail later in my talk. And those studies specifically were interested in investigating the central hypothesis of whether engaging with places of attachment fosters the presence of meaning in our lives. And this was work that was done and was actually led by my collaborator, Ashley Krause, who is currently an advanced graduate student. She's in her 5th year of PhD in psychology at University of Florida. And I am literally in the process of recruiting her as my postdoc next year. It's looking pretty good. So hopefully she will be joining us here next year at the University of Arizona. But I just wanted to, give credit when credit is due. This work was led by her. I am part of it, but it was led by her. And then the rest of the studies that I'm going to be talking about, I am collaborating with Ashley on all of those studies as well. So to give you a quick summary of what we kind of look at in this 5 studies that were investigating this connection between places of attachment and presence of meaning, we looked at it from various different directions. So in the first study, we just did kind of a cross-sectional correlational study where we assessed kind of like how much of a place of attachment people generally report to experience. And we found that it was positively correlated with sense of presence of meaning, as well as components of meaning that kind of research identifies, which is coherence, significant, and purpose. And we found that connection for all of those outcomes. Then in the second study, we used experience sampling method, meaning that we were kind of pinning our participants throughout the day using an app and asking them to report on their momentary feelings of or sense of meaning. And we were able to actually see where they were located at that time, whether they were at their places of attachment or some other places that they wouldn't necessarily consider their places of attachment. And we did find that in terms of that momentary presence, people were reporting higher levels of meaning when they were in their places of attachment. Then we moved on to some experimental manipulation, and we used kind of an established ways of manipulating place attachment, where basically people are asked to kind of recall a place that they feel strongly attached to and kind of cognitively and psychologically engage with that place versus kind of a more neutral or low attachment situations. And we found that generally people also reported more presence of meaning in their lives when they were engaging with those places of attachment versus neutral low. Then we also wanted to have kind of a longitudinal control. So in the next study, we basically did a kind of similar methodology, but this time we controlled for baseline or pre-existing levels of meaning in life before our manipulation and still found the same differences. And then finally, with the last study that was also experimental, we again returned to looking at those specific components of meaning in addition to the measure of presence of meaning. And we did find that in those high attachment places, the higher presence of meaning was present, also higher coherence, higher purpose, and higher significance. So what all those studies suggest is that when we engage with our places of attachment, whether we are actually physically in those places or we're kind of thinking about them and kind of mentally traveling to those places, Either way, we find this connection between engaging with those places of attachment and higher sense of meaning in life. However, while this kind of connection is being pretty, I think, robustly established within those studies, kind of the question remains is what is kind of the mechanism behind it? Why those places of attachment lead to this sense of meaning? And that is something that I wanted to kind of investigate in the series of studies that I'm going to be talking about next. And there is one kind of a potential explanation or potential mechanism that really drew my attention, and I wanted to kind of see if that was the explanation for this connection. And specifically, in order to kind of talk about that mechanism, I need to take a step back and talk a little bit about self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is kind of like a larger theory and has a lot of different things that it proposes. But one of the specific things that it posits is this idea of basic psychological needs. So what the theory suggests is that in order for us to kind of live the best life possible, to flourish, to just be happy, really, we need the satisfaction of three basic psychological needs. And that is need for autonomy, and that kind of like feeling that we're not being controlled by others, that the things that we do, we actually kind of do them because we want to and not somebody else wants them for us. The need for competence, which is kind of like self-efficacy, just being able to do things well and kind of like feel like we're capable of doing things that we want to do in life. And then finally, the need for relatedness, which is just feeling of connectedness with other people, feeling that there are people out there that care for us and that we care for other people out there as well. So basically, when we're satisfying all of those three basic psychological needs, that leads to very positive outcomes that are connected to well-being. So what I was interested in is connecting kind of this explanation of basic psychological needs to this relationship between place attachment and meaning in life. More specifically, I wanted to kind of investigate this satisfaction of basic psychological needs as a mediator. So the research question kind of for the next few studies that I'm going to be talking about is, does the place attachment promote meaning in life by satisfying these basic psychological needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness, and that kind of explanation for why place attachment leads to higher meaning in life? So there were two main hypotheses that were tested within the studies. The first one was just kind of a replication of the studies that I just talked about a minute ago, which is the greater sense of place attachment will be positively related to greater sense of meaning. But most importantly, the second hypothesis is kind of the new one, that basic psychological need satisfaction will mediate that relationship between place attachment and meaning in life. So moving to the first study was cross-sectional, meaning was correlational, and participants were students within the study with kind of very typical student demographics. And what we did, we just did a lot of kind of like measuring of self-reports of people's level of place attachment, basic psychological needs, and presence for meaning. So all of the kind of constructs were measured using multiple items, but I just pulled one item for each construct to kind of help them illustrate them a little bit more. And all of those scales were using 1 to 7 like Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And for place attachment, people were just asked to think about a place that they kind of consider to be attached to, and then respond to multiple items, such as, I feel this place is a part of me. Then for basic psychological needs, I pulled kind of one item for each need, and it would go, when I'm in this place, I feel a sense of choice and freedom in the things that I undertake. So that's autonomy. For competence, when I'm in this place, I feel confident that I can do things well. For relatedness, when I'm in this place, I feel that the people I care about also care about me. And then finally, we have presence of meaning, which is measured, well, a simple item is when I'm in this place, my life has a clear sense of purpose. So then we were able to kind of gather it all in a model. So I'm going to move on straight to kind of hypothesis 2. The hypothesis 1 was also supported, but you can kind of see it in this model as well. So specifically here, we're testing the mediation through the basic psychological needs, and we do find it. So it is a full mediation through all of the 3 needs, and we kind of like all of the different connections are significant here. So we see that place attachment significantly connects to all of the 3 needs, and they in turn significantly all lead to place for meaning. And when we account for those needs, the direct effect here disappears, meaning that it does fully explain this relationship between place attachment and presence of meaning. Also, I don't have a graph for that, but just to kind of tell you, we've also tried to put just one need at a time, and it does not lead to full mediation model. It only provides a partial mediation, which even further supports our hypothesis that it's really all of the 3 needs that we need to kind of fulfill and satisfy in order to kind of have that effect on sense of meaning in life. So while this was very encouraging and great results, as any reviewer on a paper will tell you, cross-sectional mediation, boo, don't trust it. So we wanted to follow it up with some experimental replication of this results, where we basically wanted to manipulate place attachment, right? To really establish this causal chain from place attachment to the needs to presence of meaning. So this time we had participants from Prolific, which is an online kind of panel of participants that could get paid for their participation. And then in many ways, the kind of measures were similar, except of course, the biggest difference here is that instead of just kind of measuring self-reported place attachment, we manipulated it. And specifically, we randomly assigned people to either place attachment or control condition. And I'll show you the kind of what the manipulation looks like just in a second. Then we measured basic psychological needs, just the same way as in the previous study. Presence of meaning, same way. But then we also added those components of meaning: coherence, purpose, and significance. And here I also have some sample items. Again, they were not measured with just one item, but I wanted to show those items here. So for coherence, it would go: when I'm in this place, I can make sense of the things that happen in my life. For purpose, when I'm in this place, I have a good sense of what I'm trying to accomplish in life. And finally, for significance, when I'm in this place, I feel like my life matters, even considering how big the universe is. So I think it gives like a little bit of a flavor to like what those components really are trying to get at. So as promised, this is an example of our manipulation for place attachment, and it comes from a previously established kind of way of manipulating that. And the first part is where kind of like the difference was presented depending on the condition for participants, which kind of is presented in the parentheses here. So participants were asked to bring to mind a place in your current life today that is familiar to you and that you have a strong attachment to in the attachment condition, or neutral feelings about in the control condition. And then they were asked to kind of like, what is that place? And then kind of that followed with the same text for both conditions. Take a moment to think about what it's like to be there. What do you do? What do you normally do? What do you see, smell, and hear? Try to put yourself in that place as you think about what it's like. Please write a short description of the place, its characteristic, and your experience in it. What you smell, what you hear, what you see, and what you're doing. Please write until the timer runs out, but feel free to write for longer if you like. And the timer was for 2 minutes, just to kind of like keep people in the moment and really let them kind of engage psychologically with the places that we were asking them about. So with that, we also kind of like, when we asked them, what is this place? And I think this is kind of like a fun bit of results. Like we actually have the most like frequent mentioned places in different conditions, and they do differ. So specifically for the attachment condition, and that's just generally kind of in the research on place attachment, home is usually one of the kind of like most frequently mentioned places. So you see about 41% of participants was mentioning that. And then outdoor and nature was the second most popular answer. And then for control condition, it was kind of like a little bit more split, and commercial places, which would be like a store, coffee shop, like those kind of things, were number one. Again, it's a more neutral kind of place. Outdoor nature also made an appearance, although with a lower percentage, and then someone else's home was kind of like the third most popular answer. So yeah, just kind of find it interesting to like look at those frequencies of places and see what people are envisioning as their places of attachment. But of course, there is, you know, a wide variety of places that people generally mention in both conditions. So now let's turn to main results. That should look familiar to you. It's basically kind of the same results as in study one, which is yay, that's good. So we kind of like able to replicate that same model of mediation through all of the three basic psychological needs, from place attachment to presence of meaning. And again, it's full mediation here, as this direct effect kind of goes away when we account for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. But as you might recall, we also measured those three different components of meaning this time. So let's look at what happens there. So if we put coherence as our outcome, so coherence is kind of the sense that like things make sense, things go together with one another. We see kind of similar picture as before, right? So again, it's a full mediation, everything is significant, all is looking great, but as you know in science, you know things gotta start falling apart at some point, and here where it starts. So when we plug in purpose, which is the most surprising to me out of them all, that like what happens with purpose, to be honest, the purpose is like we all know, it's like we have something, like we feel like we have a purpose in whatever we're doing in life, like, you know, what we do in life matters, we're like affecting other people, that kind of stuff. So what interesting is that there's only one thing that kind of drops off, and that is connection from autonomy to purpose. And that's why it's so surprising to me, because remember, autonomy is that sense that I do what I want, no one is kind of controlling what I'm doing. So how come it's not connected to purpose? I'm not sure. One potential explanation that I have here is because of the kind of like, not to get too statistically kind of into nitty-gritty, but looking at the confidence interval, kind of it's very skewed to the positive way. So it includes 0, which makes it non-significant, but the amount kind of on this side of the 0 is so small compared to this side of the 0. So there is a small potential that it's just maybe an underpowered type of situation where we maybe needed more participants to detect that effect. That's a potential explanation. I can't tell you for sure, but maybe, because kind of conceptually, it really is surprising to me. But everything else kind of hangs on. And then the same thing with significance as well. And significance is that sense that like even though there's like billions of people on the planet, like my existence still important, and I'm still making some kind of, you know, impactful kind of whatever I do, it's impactful kind of on the world as a whole. So that's kind of sense of significance. And then again, autonomy is here, but this time my statistical explanation doesn't even fly here, because this is actually more evenly distributed. So, but it also like, it makes a little bit more sense that autonomy would not be connected to significance. With purpose, it's just, I don't know, it's kind of like not very surprising too. But so yeah, so like overall, we're kind of finding things are replicating for the main kind of models, but then with specific meaning outcomes, we see things might fall apart a little bit. So with that, I'm like, okay, but what's next, right? So it looks pretty good. It looks like the kind of the needs do truly matter, and they do explain for the most part, especially when we're looking at presence of meaning. So what kind of like I wanted to do next is I wanted to continue testing this causal chain model of kind of one thing leading to another. So because kind of that, if you go back here, this part of the model was, I'm trying to do the laser. This part of the model was tested pretty well in terms of we manipulated place attachment, it led to this, it led to that, like we kind of know what's going on. But we never manipulated this and looked at if it leads to meaning over here. So this is kind of what I mean by testing this second part of the model to just truly establish this kind of causal chain, this leads to this, this leads to that, and then, you know, we really know kind of what is going on and in what order things are happening. So in order to kind of test that, we had to do a pilot test because while basic psychological needs have been manipulated previously in research, although mostly autonomy, because that's kind of what all the self-determination theory people are really about. But there are a few studies where all of them were manipulated, but never in a place context, right? So there was one study where they manipulated that, like making people play Tetris. Like I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me. So we had to do a pilot, and what we did, we got a bunch of students to participate, and then we randomly assigned them to one of the 7 conditions, potentially too many conditions. But we wanted to see kind of, we wanted to manipulate each of the needs in both high and low way, and also have a control condition. So that's kind of how we ended up with 7. So it's high autonomy, low autonomy, high competence, low competence, and so forth. And then we just measured basic psychological needs satisfaction as an outcome. So it's just a pilot. We're not like actually, meaning is not involved, because we're just testing kind of like whether our manipulation would actually manipulate the needs in a way that we think it should. And here's just an example of the vignettes that we used to manipulate the needs. And for all of them, the setup was a quiet reading room in a library, and then it kind of described it as either having, you know, this is specifically high autonomy condition, so it's kind of like a lot to read. I'll just like read some things to just like emphasize. Yeah, I can see that. I have to look here. So Brisa says the space allows you to decide how you want to spend your time. You look around and choose a seat that feels right to you. You select what to read, what to work on. You can switch tasks whenever you wish. So you can see it's like it's really telling you like this place allows you to do whatever you want to do. And if you want to switch, you can switch. You want to sit here, you can sit here, and so forth. Now, this is the low autonomy vignette, just as a kind of comparison, and it's quite the opposite, right? So it starts off the same, quiet reading room in the library, but then the space determines that how you must spend time there. The tasks are already chosen for you, and you must follow them in the required order. So you can see it's a very controlled kind of environment that is being described. And of course, we also had those vignettes for the other needs, again, high and low. And then our control condition was just pure description. It was like, there's a quiet room in the library, there are chairs, there are bookshelves, there are, you know, things you can do there, right? So it was like a very descriptive. We really tried to kind of control for not really mentioning getting any of the needs. So now, here that where it gets interesting. This was a failed pilot. So let me explain how was it failed. So here you can see all of the different conditions. So different bars represent our different conditions, which remember we had 7 of them. And then I have this graph for each one of the needs. So this one is for autonomy. And this one highlights really exactly how this failed, because when we are manipulating autonomy, we would think that the highest level of autonomy would be in a high autonomy condition, which is right here. But when we can see pretty much the same levels of autonomy in high competence condition, high relatedness condition, and in control condition, which kind of tells us that basically when we're trying to manipulate one need, kind of the rest of them also go up with that need. And then the control condition also kind of like leads to pretty high feeling of those needs being met. This is competence, very similar kind of structure here. Here, high competence is the highest, but not like by that much. And you again can see it's like every other bar is high, right? So like every condition, including control, kind of is showing those similar results. And then relatedness was the one that came the closest to what we wanted. This is actually like highest relatedness in the high relatedness condition. But as you can see, again, the other conditions are still kind of yielding a little too much of that high relatedness there as well. And kind of the low conditions are also not doing what we would want to do with them quite either. And I do like to kind of present on that, to be honest, and especially for those of you students in the audience, is just to emphasize this. I could have like just skipped that and be like, all of my things work perfectly. I'm just, perfect scientist. But that's just part of the process. And I think that's kind of the cool part about science is like figuring out where you went wrong and kind of like why things are not working. And of course, also we love to explain things post hoc. And of course, I have explanations for you post hoc of how and why it didn't work and kind of what is going on here. And in a way, it kind of makes sense. And in the other way, it doesn't quite make sense. So let me start with like kind of how it makes sense to me. Again, very much post hoc. That's not what I expected previously. But first I'll start with the control condition. So why is control condition being kind of so high across all of the different manipulations, or I guess across different needs? Is one thing that we know in kind of well-being research in general is when we're looking at various well-being measures, outcomes, what have you, generally they're not normally distributed. So for instance, if you take like personality traits like extroversion and conscientiousness, they provide this beautiful bell curve where like exactly in the middle, like this perfect normal distribution. With well-being variables, we actually don't get that. They're all skewed positive, which is great. That means most people are not just average level happy, they're more than average level happy. And same thing happens with basic psychological needs. Generally, people kind of fairly satisfied with all of those needs. So why it explains this control condition is that I'm thinking that if we're not providing people with any kind of cues on how they're supposed to feel in this place and just describing some generic place, they're like, well, normally I feel pretty related and pretty autonomous and pretty competent. So that's probably how I would feel in this place. So that kind of like, to me, explains the control condition. In terms of the other conditions, I think that it's also kind of the element of like, we're making people feel pretty good about one need. It kind of makes them feel good in general. And this is something that also kind of common in research too. When you like improve like somebody's mood, there's like all these other things that are going to go up as well. So oftentimes when you're kind of manipulating something one in a good way, like other things might follow, even though you might not want to manipulate them. So that's kind of my explanation for why this kind of might make sense. On the other hand, what makes me wonder more and like, well, maybe it doesn't make sense, is that when you think about different places that you might be occupying at different times, like there are definitely places that don't satisfy all the needs. Like it's not always like either all of my needs are satisfied or all of my needs are not satisfied, right? So I can think of places where maybe I'm feeling very autonomous, but maybe not very related, or places where I feel very related, but maybe I'm lacking autonomy or competence in those places. So with that, I'm like, well, there's something going on here that maybe I can't necessarily explain. And it could be, it's just basically kind of bad manipulations, really. That is what it kind of comes down to. And I think I haven't done another pilot yet, but I'm sure it's in my future at some point. And I think that maybe there needs to be a more explicit kind of mentions of kind of like, this is a place that is high in autonomy, but also low on those other things. Maybe that would lead to a better outcomes. Also, we did kind of try to control for the place and have this hypothetical place for people. Another route that we discussed but decided not to go to, and maybe that's where we went wrong, is actually to allow people to think of their own place that would fit a certain description instead of kind of telling them what the place is. That might be kind of like work better for us in this case. But what kind of we decided to do in the meantime, before jumping into another pilot right away, we decided to kind of take a step back and kind of like understand this relationship between basic psychological needs and places better, because there's just not research on that. And we decided to do a qualitative study to kind of understand those very things that I was talking about. Like, what are those places that might meet some needs but not others? What are the places that meet all of the needs? What are the places that meet none of the needs? Like, what is it about them that kind of makes people feel the certain way in those places? So what we did, we got another sample of prolific participants, and we basically started off by introducing all of the participants to this idea of basic psychological needs, very similar to kind of what I described to you earlier. We just described all the needs, kind of gave the definitions, some examples. And then once participants were introduced to that, we randomly assign them to one of 8 conditions. So each participant only saw one condition. And why was it 8? Because we wanted all the different combinations of the needs, and that's kind of what it comes out to. So because there's 3, so like all high or low, and then any combination of the in between that exists there. Once we kind of describe what condition people are in, we ask them to kind of tell us what type of place that they thought of and describe that place. And then finally, we ask them like why the needs were either met or not met, kind of depending on what condition they were in that place. And finally, we just did like a little manipulation check just to make sure that they were like reading the instructions and stuff. So with that, I have this kind of a example of what participants saw in all high need conditions. So again, remember, they already been explained what the different needs are, but then they were asked to please think of a real place where you typically feel very free to choose what you do, high autonomy, very capable and effective, high competence, and very connected or welcomed by others, high relatedness. And just to give you an example of a different condition, so this one is high autonomy, low competence, low relatedness. Very similar in structure, but just says that you typically do not feel very capable, effective, or do not feel very connected or welcomed. So, and then again, this is just 2 of 8. So there were all kind of different combinations there. So similarly to kind of how I showed you a little table before in terms of the most popular place for attachment, not attachment, here is kind of a little bit of a busy table because of 8 conditions of kind of the most popular places that people were mentioning by condition. So this is the most quantitative piece of this qualitative study. So you can see they're kind of like autonomy, competence, and relatedness are there, and you can see what kind of combination the condition was, and I'm just going to go kind of in order. So perhaps not surprisingly, when all the needs were met kind of at the high level, the most popular answer was home. Again, that kind of aligns with the things that I was talking about in the previous study. So also often the places of attachment are also homes. So that was the most popular answer. Then for high autonomy, high competence, but low relatedness, oftentimes that was some kind of commercial place, such as restaurant or store. Kind of not necessarily super surprising. People maybe like kind of feel like they can, especially if the person goes like working at one of those places, they perhaps they don't have a lot of people they know there, so they might not feel very connected, but they feel like they're kind of, autonomous and can do their work well. Then for high autonomy, low competence, and high relatedness, the most kind of common response was some kind of nature area or outdoor space. And that one was very interesting, and I'll show you actual qualitative data in a little bit that kind of brings that a little bit to light. And it seems like from my kind of reading of responses is that low competence in this case not seen as in a bad way, but more in this kind of really kind of giving props to nature as being like powerful, and maybe compared to nature we don't feel very competent sometimes. Then for high autonomy, low competence, and low relatedness, we again have the commercial place. So there's some overlap there, but some people feel competent, others do not. And then next part is like where we see a pattern. So this is where we enter the low autonomy kind of conditions. And for 3 out of 4 conditions with low autonomy, the top place that was mentioned was the workplace. And that makes me really sad because it means that people truly don't feel autonomous at their work, and they feel like basically micromanaged for the most part in the places that are their workplaces. However, at least people, there's some people who feel also competent, and they feel like they're doing good work, and maybe they're friends with their coworkers, so they feel high relatedness. Others who just feel competent, but maybe not very related. And then there are people who feel both low autonomy, low competence, but do have some friend coworkers, I guess. So they might feel kind of high relatedness there. And then probably the biggest surprise out of all of these different things is the all low condition, and that was someone else's house. And when I started looking at the actual qualitative data, I realize it's someone else's house, but there is a big caveat, they need to hate that person. Then that really, fulfills that, because it's clearly, it's not a loved person's house. It's somebody that the person doesn't have like good relationship with, and that kind of relates to the needs. So to bring all of this a little bit to life, I pulled out 4 different kind of quotes from people, and I tried to match them with kind of what was the most popular mentioned place. So you will see, for instance, for all high condition, it's going to be an example of home, and so forth. And I didn't pull for all of them because, I didn't want to bore you with all the readings, but 4 I feel like was a good number. So the first one is all needs high, and a person is talking about their home. And they say, I love working, cooking, and spending time with my family here. It is a place where we spend holidays, meals together, and have just wonderful family get-togethers. I feel like this is a place of love and family. Sounds really cozy and warm, and I love it. Okay, next one is high competence, low autonomy, and relatedness. So that's the workplace example. I usually need to go to work and do things according to the rules and keep my head up. I am not the most welcome person as the boss, but I am very competent. So this person is, feeling like they know what they're doing, but seems like they're, you can be liked as a boss. I'm pretty sure. I think that that's just a little bit of a cop out on their part. Okay, this one is the longest one, and this is the one, the nature one, where it's a low competence but high autonomy and high relatedness. And here a person is talking about Rocky Mountain National Park, which makes me feel free and connected because of the vastness of it and how beautiful the landscape is. The mountain peaks, lakes, and crisp air creates a sense of awe that you don't find anywhere else. Rocky Mountain National Park can also make me feel low in competence because of the rugged terrain and unpredictable weather. Even as an experienced hiker, scaling some of these trails are still very humbling. It makes me feel that I have a lot to learn still, but in a good way. And that's kind of what I was talking about, that this low competence in the situations where people mention nature, it's like not necessarily seen in this kind of like a negative way that like I want to be doing better, but I'm not. It's more kind of seen as really this realization that sometimes there are higher powers such as nature that can, we need to be humbled by sometimes. So that's an example of that one. And finally, we have the all low, and this is somebody else's house example. I don't feel like I could say anything I want. When I do talk to her, she's very quiet and short with me. I find myself rambling more than anything, just so that it's not awkwardly quiet, expecting her to engage and respond back, but I tend to be the only person talking. I just feel this looming pressure to be perfect, but I feel a little bit judged. So as you can see, this kind of like the emotion that is coming from this comparing to emotion that is coming from the first one is so different, right? So clearly the person here is like, they're just not feeling great in that environment. And then the first description is just so full of like positive emotion kind of radiating. So I think this is kind of really interesting qualitative data that kind of highlights the richness of the people's relationship with different places and how those needs can really explain this different kind of emotional outcomes that can kind of come through those different descriptions. And I'm still in the process of kind of like formally organizing all of that. So I actually collected that data like 2 weeks ago. So it's probably going to take a little time to go through all of them. It's 240 participants. So me and Ashley, my collaborator, we are kind of in the process of like really digging in and looking into that data a little bit more. And we hope that that can inform the future pilot to kind of like finish up that second leg of the things, and also to kind of just understand better this relationship between basic psychological needs and different places. So this is where kind of first part of the project ends, but I have the second part. And the second part has been inspired by similar kind of prior work looking at connection between places, attachment, and meaning, but this time it's looking at the different kind of meaning. So specifically, so far, I've been talking about presence of meaning. So that's when we are like really feeling like we know what life is about, we're doing the right things, it makes sense, it has purpose. However, there is also this idea of search for meaning, and search for meaning is the extent to which individuals are actively seeking or striving to find meaning in life. And search for meaning is kind of an interesting construct because it's kind of it can be bad and good, kind of like depending on different kind of circumstances, and different studies find different kind of correlates in terms of that. So it can reflect curiosity or perceived absence of meaning, right? Curiosity, pretty good. Absence of meaning, not so good, right? But that kind of absence of meaning can promote the exploration and therefore search for meaning. So it can be adaptive or maladaptive. It kind of depends on the context and what's going on. So on one hand, in the more adaptive ways, it can be linked to growth and openness and kind of curiosity, as I mentioned before, but also it can be connected to distress when we're experiencing this lack of meaning, and that kind of connects to this more maladaptive way. And generally, it's often associated with change, questioning, and development, which again, kind of can be adaptive or maladaptive, depending on what we're looking at. So the fact that search for meaning was connected to places of attachment was honestly a surprise for both Ashley and I. We were like, okay, presence of meaning makes perfect sense. People are attached to their places. They provide that sense of kind of grounding and sense of that things are making sense. However, why the search for meaning that also is connected to that? And we like looked at several studies where we kind of find that. And we again kind of started thinking about what could be some potential explanations. So we know they're connected, but like what can possibly explain this connection? And the basic needs don't quite make sense because basic needs usually lead to positive, kind of like strictly positive well-being outcomes, such as subjective well-being, presence of meaning, all those kind of good things. So search for meaning kind of doesn't make sense there. However, there's other kind of potential explanation that could explain why this connection. And one of them is this idea of psychological richness. And psychological richness generally refers to life that is interesting, eventful, and perspective changing. So it's rich in variety and it's rich in emotional depth. So unlike such as like happy life, for instance, that is just pure bliss. There is nothing kind of negative going on. Psychological richness is more about kind of experiencing the depthness of human emotions, even though it can kind of like creep up on our happiness. But some people really value this kind of like experience of all the emotions. Think about like if you have watched like a really sad movie or read like a book that like wrecked you, you are probably kind of searching for that psychological richness in your life. And it's, you're like maybe made yourself cry on purpose, but you did it because you wanted to feel things, right? So people who are genuinely kind of high in psychological richness tend to seek novelty, complexity, and exploration. And even when those experiences could be uncomfortable or not necessarily happy, right? So kind of again, putting ourselves kind of purposefully in those situations of exploration, even at the cost of our comfort or happiness. And the reason that I think this kind of could be a good explanation for search for meaning, because it's already kind of just in my description of psychological richness, I'm hoping that it's coming through that there is like that curiosity, that like kind of search, this exploration, it's all kind of mapping up to that search for meaning as well. So that's why kind of in the second kind of part of this project, we were interested in investigating psychological richness as this potential explanation between the place attachment to search for meaning. So because kind of like beyond the comfort and stability, meaningful places can also provide us with this variety and novelty and perspective changing. Those are all these key components of psychological richness. Experiencing one's surrounding as rich and stimulating may actually encourage this exploration and curiosity, promoting this deeper search for meaning in life. So in other words, place attachment can not only kind of work as this grounding and leading to the kind of more presence of meaning, but also might want us to expand on kind of our worldview, our things that kind of like we still want to explore and maybe seek that perspective changing. So in the next couple of studies that I'm going to be talking about, the research question was really investigating if psychological richness can be that mediator between place attachment and search for meaning this time. And the hypotheses are quite similar to what I showed you in the previous studies. So the first one is that the graded place of attachment will positively associated with search for meaning. And then the second one is that psychological richness will mediate the relationship between place attachment and search for meaning. So the first study, this time we didn't even bother with prosocial. We're like, let's go straight to the experiments. So this time the participants were students and they were randomly assigned to either place attachment or control condition, same methodology as in the previous studies that I showed. Then we measured psychological richness. Again, it wasn't measured just with the one item, but here is one item just to kind of illustrate the construct. So it said, when I'm in this place, my life has a lot of interesting experiences. And then search for meaning, again, example item, when I'm in this place, I'm always searching for something that makes my life feel significant. Okay, straight to the results, another mediation model. And here we do find it's a little bit more simple. We only have one mediator, but we do find a full mediation here. So when we account for psychological richness, the direct effect between place attachment and search for meaning goes away, showing that it really is explained by psychological richness overall. So that was promising, but I have a thing where I need to keep exploring and make sure that things are actually affecting one another. And again, especially kind of because this work has not been done in a place context, I'm really curious in kind of investigating that further. So here's another pilot. Spoiler alert, this one didn't fail. So this time we got 210 students. We randomly assigned them to one of the three conditions, and all the conditions are shown here. So we have high psychological richness, low psychological richness, and control. And then we just measured psychological richness just to make sure that we were manipulating what we thought we were manipulating. And just to give you an example, I'll read just the high richness condition. So this place is full of variety and surprise. Each day brings different events, unexpected encounters, and chances to see things from new perspectives. Life here rarely feels repetitive. This place often affords moments of discovery and challenges that are engaging. And then, yeah, kind of the opposite with the other one. And this one is, yeah, there's 4 doors, 4 walls, and a door, and 2 windows. Yeah, very kind of bland description. So here are the results of the pilot. So we're looking at the levels of psychological richness, and this is exactly what we want to see, right? High psychological richness is showing the highest results, lowest is the low, and control is somewhere in between. They're all statistically significant from one another. It's a huge effect. Lovely. That's exactly what we hope when we're gonna, to find when we do pilots. So, sometimes it does work. So there is hope for all of us. Okay, so now that the pilot worked, we wanted to actually use these manipulations that we piloted and do study 2. So in study 2, we got participants from prolific, and we randomly assigned them to either high, low, or control condition, or high, low psychological richness or control condition. So 3 experimental condition. Again, the participants only are assigned to 1. Then we measured search for meaning, kind of the same way as before. This place, I would always search for something that makes my life feel significant. And then kind of more of an exploratory thing, we added presence of meaning as well. And again, measured kind of as it was measured in previous studies. But yeah, so we were mostly looking for search, but presence was just kind of for fun in there. So, and this is where things did not go as expected. Here are the results. So what we were expecting to see is kind of similar stuff what we saw with the pilot in terms of how conditions would behave in terms of search for meaning, but that's not necessarily what we found. So while there was a significant difference overall in the model, when we look at the actual specific conditions, we find that the high psychological richness was associated with the highest level of search for meaning compared to control. However, this difference is not statistically significant, or neither is this. So these are the only two conditions that do provide us with statistically significant kind of statistically significantly different results. That's what I meant to say. So this was kind of surprising. We were a bit bummed out. I think I moved on a little bit faster than Ashley. She was really thinking about it for too long. I'm like, this is okay. We just need to do more studies to figure out what happened. And I do have, again, post hoc. I'm really good at coming up with post hoc explanations. So I do have one, obviously hasn't been tested, but that's kind of where we most likely going next with that. Is so the analogy that I'm going to use here is kind of hunger. So if we think about psychological richness as hunger, so when I'm hungry, I really think about food. What are some other times when I really think about food? Is when food is in front of me, regardless of how hungry I am, right? So when I have abundance of food, I think of food. When I'm hungry, I think of food. So that's kind of what I think is going on here. So when people are kind of psychologically rich, they're like, I have all of this amazing experience. My perspective is changing. There's so much variety. I want more. I'm going to go search for it in this search for meaning way. On the other hand, we have people who are low in richness and they're like, there's not much going on. Well, I'm going to go and search for it, and I kind of want more of that. So that's kind of my explanation there. I don't know if that's, I don't have any data to back that up. It's my post hoc explanation to kind of explain this unexpected results. I'm really curious to hear what you guys think. Also pretty fresh data. Again, we haven't like made next strides necessarily here, but I think like that I would like to test this potential explanation and kind of see what exactly is going on. I'm not sure exactly how, but we'll get there. But I also wanted to show you results for the presence of meaning. Remember that one which we added just kind of for fun? That one actually showed the results that we wanted to see for search. So here we see kind of the conditions are acting in a more of a expected way. So the highest richness is connected to highest presence of meaning. Lowest richness is connected to lowest presence of meaning, and control is somewhere in between. I'm also not surprised that those two are not statistically different from one another, because kind of control kind of assumes a little bit of a low richness in there. So, you know, it's kind of that part doesn't surprise me. It's more that the previous one. So it seems like the richness is also connected to presence of meaning. So similar to kind of how place attachment connects to both presence and search, apparently psychological richness also connects to presence and search. So lots of different things to kind of think about, but that's kind of like where we at now with this particular project. So just to kind of summarize and wrap things up, mixed results for the psychological richness and search for meaning. Definitely would like to explore more, definitely going somewhere with that, just don't know exactly where. And kind of more broadly for like larger next steps, we're really interested in exploring kind of more awe-inspiring places and their connection to psychological richness and meaning. Specifically, there's some work on awe that suggests that when we are kind of experiencing awe, it makes us feel more smaller, kind of like in the, you know, kind of like it connects to a sense of a smaller self. And that seemed to be very connected to potential search for meaning and kind of this more of an exploration that psychological richness is associated with. And of course, like I'm talking about all this place work, and I haven't brought a single person to any place. So I would really like to do that. So that is definitely the biggest next step in all of my work. Like I actually want to do research where people are physically in places. And I think like, especially here in Tucson, we have so many awe-inspiring places. Like, I mean, that I can, drive to a national park in like 15 minutes from here. Like that is pretty unique. And then of course in Arizona, we also have Grand Canyon, fun data collection site, I think. So those are kind of things that I'm thinking about in the future. And just to kind of circle back to the first half-ish of a presentation, I'm gonna continue examining this qualitative data in terms of basic psychological needs and places, and kind of try to understand it better, like think of like, I mean, we're trying to do thematic analysis on it, so like really establish themes and kind of understand how they connect to these different kind of profiles of different needs. So yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say, and I want to say many thanks to you guys for listening to me, and of course Ashley Krause, again, she was a collaborator on all of the things that I was talking about, and to my lab here at U of A. So yeah, thank you so much.
Questions?
Yes.
Oh my God, thank you so much for the talk. It was so interesting, and I found myself like jotting down so many questions as they came along.
Thank you.
So thank you. To begin, I think I want to ask you, does place attachment work similarly to attachment as we study that in relationships?
Yeah, it kind of stems from the same ideas, right? So yeah, so it's very related to relationships that we form. And it's kind of like a theoretical thing where some people are like, oh, you should be able to like separate it from relationships, and other people are like, you cannot possibly separate it from relationships, because it's often about that. And even when you think about, some people might kind of think about place attachment is like whatever I am with so and so, or like with this group of people, right? So it's more relationship make like the place do those things. But then for other people, it's a little bit less like that, right? But there is a lot of kind of connections with between kind of attachment theory in connection to people and attachment theory in connection to places. There's a lot of overlap. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was asking this just because we often study about like global attachment style and then specific attachment style, which like differs between people, which is why I was going to ask you about, do you see that in like places like I can be attached differently to my home, and I can be attached differently to my university, for example, like, and I both have strong attachments to those places, but they are different in their nature.
Yeah, so I think you're totally correct. You can be differently attached. You can be attached to different places in different way, kind of like people. In the work that I've been doing with place attachment, I usually kind of like, I tell them to pick a place, right? And then I don't compare it to a different place. It's just like, this is a place that and it could be any number of those places that a person is attached to. So I don't have like, personally, I have not done work that kind of like compares them, but yes, you're totally correct in terms of like, you can have different attachment. It could be for different reasons. Kind of, as I said, like one could be like all because of people. The other one could be all because of like some memories. The other one could be because, you just feel really productive there or something, right? So yeah, it can be different.
Thank you. I do have more questions, but I want to leave room for
Hey. We do have a question online.
Yeah.
How do you see the immigrant health paradox informing our understanding of happiness and belonging? Place attachment might not be very high in recent arrivals, but in many immigrant communities, stronger social cohesion and prosocial norms coexist with structural disadvantage. Do you think these factors could explain why some first-generation immigrants report better well-being despite adversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it kind of, again, the place attachment is more about the feeling and less about like physically being in the place. So a person might be separated from their place and still have those kind of strong feelings that do help them kind of psychologically through things. And I think also kind of people differ in terms of how easy it is for them to form place attachment, right? So some people are kind of like, with immigrants, there's also a lot of like work on like motivational why people are immigrating that also kind of connects in terms of that. But there could be that some people are like, okay, I am here now, and this, I'm gonna work on it, like make it my home, this is fine, I have my community, this is great. And then the people are really connecting to that. And then other people might really feel kind of like, I will never replace what I left, right? So like, I think that kind of how people approach those things on an individual level can vary a lot. But then also, yeah, I know that there's work where like sometimes first generation immigrants, I think that's what was mentioned in the question, have like a stronger attachment to place in the new place than their like own children sometimes. which also can be kind of connected to that kind of approach, how people are like, they're like, I found my community, this is good, like I am establishing within this place. And then for, I think, second generation, there's often this struggle of like, they still maybe don't feel like they're true American, and they're kind of like not being necessarily kind of feel like they're being accepted, but then at the same time they're like, but I'm not true whatever I came from. It's like also kind of weird. So like it can kind of like lead for people to be in this kind of in between places in terms of their identity. And I think that can connect to kind of like feeling of places as well. Yeah, but I don't have like any like empirical things to support those thoughts. So yes.
I wonder, since there was a high percentage of home as being that, if ownership has anything to do with attachment.
Yes, the quick answer is no. So generally, if we look at kind of like just happiness overall, homeowners are usually better, but it's usually just because they have no money. So that's kind of, you know, but if looking at kind of like more of the feelings that people have about place, it's not so much about the ownership necessarily. So you can really feel attached. Like I've done some work on like not necessarily attachment, but hominess and like freshmen in dorms. Huge variety, right? So people, like none of them are owning these dorms, right? But you can still see a big difference in terms of kind of like how they feel it's their own place. And it comes from a lot of other psychological things that they're like, what is actually going on in the, like, do you feel like they belong to the university? Are they kind of genuinely happy? Do they get along with their roommate? You know, like all of those kind of things. And then the home ownership is, it's like in some studies, like when you like look at it, it's not much. And then it definitely those things that are connected to feelings that we have about place and our well-being outcomes. When we control for home ownership, that nothing changes as well.
It's such a big topic right now with our culture in the United States. You know, we used to be able to own a home by this age, and now they're saying now you don't own a home until you're 40 or whatever. So I could imagine it influencing competence. So I was just curious about that. Our feelings of competence and autonomy and our ability to live the American dream or whatever it is.
Yeah, you know, interesting. I always thought about it more as an autonomy kind of thing. Of like, can I like do whatever I want with my home or whatever?
Knock holes in the wall.
Yeah. But overall, it seems like, you know, like your ability to like paint a wall a different color has very little to do with like how you feel in this place, right? Like you can, it's a lot more about like psychological feelings, right? And then it might, you know, like it's small things that like maybe for some people it's like really important, but generally it's not, doesn't seem to be related as much. Yeah. Yes.
Have you done any work on the components of a place, or like the places that people are mentioning, and how that's associated or related with like those psychological needs that you were mentioning?
No, I have not. So there is like a, kind of, as I said, there's a lot of work on like just place attachment, like what they are, how they form, like all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I haven't looked at kind of any components. And then like, I'm interested in the needs. So like, I think the qualitative data will answer some of those questions, kind of depending on what people are mentioning. I mean, I'm not like asking for any kind of components and stuff. I also have done some work on the sense of hominess, which is not the same as place attachment. It's more like, like, does your place feels like home? And I looked at, like, I asked everything. I was like, how many rooms you have? Do you have pets? Do you share your place? And it's like, it was a kind of like a big sample of 800 people or something like that. And they had all kind of living situations. Some homeowners, some non-homeowners, some have a room, some have a whole house. And it seems like those objective things that don't matter as much. It's more about like, how do you feel in that place? And I think like in one example I can give is like, let's say we have a married couple, and let's say they're really wealthy. Their house is like just beautiful. It has everything you could possibly imagine, but they don't like each other. you're not gonna like necessarily feel either place attachment or hominess. Like, you come back home, this is your spouse, you kind of don't like them. You might have all this like great things, but the psychological portion is missing, right? You don't feel kind of that psychological safety that you really want from your house when you do dislike somebody in it, right? But at the same time, you can have a student who lives in the dorm room, either by themselves or they're like besties with their roommate. They're kind of struggling. They don't have much, but they have a few trinkets from home. They're like really meaningful to them, and they just like love their place, right? So there could be, kind of outside of those kind of more objective things, there's still a lot kind of left over. That all being said, I don't want to kind of disregard the connection between wealth and happiness, because it's definitely there. And you can't like kind of erase it. And I'm not saying like, oh, poor people are so happy, yay. No, absolutely not. So it's still important, but I'm just saying that kind of like those subjective things seem to be more important in kind of the work that I've done than the objective kind of stuff that we might pick up with like a naked eye. Yes.
When you talk about like the psychological feelings, is that something that somebody's like carrying from their past, or more like present, like it's something that they're growing in the present? Does that make sense?
That's a great question. I think it might be different for people. So the way that I've genuinely looked at it, so in terms of like sense of hominess, I've like asked people for their definitions, and I kind of came up with like what are the themes in terms of definitions, and it seems like it's more present, but oftentimes what we think in the present is informed by the things that happened in the past, right? And I can tell you that like there's like four main things in terms of hominess that people identify, and it's physical, psychological safety in the place, right? So like the fact that you can be you, and that's where a kind of like bad relationship might kind of like affect that, right? So you just really feel like you can be safe, you can be you can do whatever you want, and you're like not in physical danger in your house too. Then there is a relationship with other people, so it's either reminders or you actually sharing your place with people you care about, they're meaningful to you. Then there's a sense of connection to identity, so like your place is like it fits you, it like reflects you, it kind of shows like some kind of customization to you. And it could be, people again define it very differently. It could be like, yeah, you have a built house that was customized to your needs, but it could be that you just have, a certain posters in your dorm room, right? It's all kind of different examples of that. And then the final one is just like it's kind of pleasant aesthetics. It's like not messy, that kind of stuff. But I also found in my work that the pleasant aesthetic, not messy, doesn't connect to happiness. The other three do, but all four are connected to understanding of hominess or feelings of hominess. So yeah, sorry.
We are at time. So if you wouldn't mind just hanging out around a little bit longer, maybe you can ask a question, Mehek, but I do kind of want to respect everyone else's time. So
I think I went on too long.
No, it was great. You just gave us a lot of stuff to talk about, which is fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to those of you here and those of you who are online, and we hope to see you at future events. Thank you.
I'm happy to hang out and answer questions.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's outside the museum, right by University Boulevard. Are you talking about the bookstore? Yeah. It's like, so it's for showing us the story so well. Yeah, I went by it earlier.
Thank you.
So that's why I know. Yeah, I think it's going from a shirt. Oh. I still don't
Do you have a question?
You're supposed to.